Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandi NP. What started as all things related to brain health and wellness has morphed into largely brain injury health and wellness, with occasional other neurological topics. My mission remains the same, to help you on the path to a healthier brain. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. I am back solo today to do the ABCs of concussion again. We are on to letters Q and R, and I've both of them together today because there's not a lot of Q words that I could come up with, but there's a lot of R, so hopefully we'll get through all of them, and I'm not going to have to split this up into 2 episodes because there are a lot of topics, actually, that start with the letter R. So again, why am I doing this series? If you are just new to this podcast and you haven't really listened to this series previously, I'm doing this series because concussions are a major thing that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and more people experience concussions than we even realize. Sometimes we have symptoms and we don't know where they exactly came from. So I often encourage people to look back before those symptoms started. Was there anything that might have constituted a concussion? Again, you don't have to hit your head and you don't have to lose consciousness to have a concussion or head injury. And again, a concussion is a mild brain injury, mild traumatic brain injury. We don't often remember those 2 things, but that concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury. It is a form of a brain injury. You don't have to hit your head. You don't have to lose consciousness. And oftentimes people kind of forget those things. And so they have these symptoms that pop up and they're not exactly sure where they came from. Or you might have had a concussion or a head injury and you thought you were fine, but now you're feeling all of these different things and you're not sure, is it related to the head injury? Is it not related to the head injury? Kind of what's bringing all of this on? So whether you're in one of those 2 camps or you're a healthcare provider and you want to know more about what the signs and symptoms could be and what other things are related, because not all of these letters are signs and symptoms. Some of them are just things that people with a brain injury experience. It might be things that they encounter, different treatments that they might have. And once I printed this and got it done and got my little notes in front of me, I realized there still were so many words. So when I get to the end of the alphabet, I might have to do kind of a little recap and kind of fill in the blanks for other things that I forgot to put in there as I was going through it. Because remember, I've also had a brain injury, and so sometimes I forget things. But again, so for today, we're back into that ABCs of concussion, moving on to letters Q and R. And again, if you listen to this series and there are other topics that you would like me to include in these, make sure you drop a comment on the show wherever you're listening, whether it's the audio version or the YouTube version, or you want to send me a message via my website. You can do that as well. And all of that information will be in the show notes for you so you know how to contact me. So without further ado, let's get into today's topics. Letters Q and R, ABCs of concussion. So the first one is questions. And this one is just something that people have, they experience, because many people with a brain injury are left with more questions than they have answers when it comes to their injury. They have questions about the recovery timeline. They have questions, which we'll also talk about in the R letters coming up. They have questions about what kind of treatments are out there. Many of those, again, that we have talked about as we've gone through the ABCs of concussion here. And I will also continue to include some of those different treatments today and in future episodes. They have questions about why this happened. How did they get a brain injury? Why are they still experiencing their symptoms? Why can't they get better faster? Why don't they see any hope? And what can they do about this when they don't see any hope? So we have all of these questions, all the whys, and a lot of times we can't answer it. And how fast will I get better? When will I get better? Will I get better? All of these questions come up, and there's not a really good way to answer them, unfortunately. So as a healthcare provider and a person who's had a brain injury, it's really hard to answer these questions because I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you when you're going to get better, but I can generally promise people that from the moment you step into my office to the moment I discharge you from my clinic, or if sometimes I just become your provider, that's fine too. But if you've had that brain injury and monitoring symptoms over time, you will get better because everybody that has touched my door has gotten better to some degree. Can't promise you a full recovery. I can't promise how quickly it's going to happen, but I promise you will get better. That's about as far as I can get on the promises part of it. But in general, how do we manage all of these questions? You really have to make sure that you are working with a compassionate provider who will give you the chance to ask the questions and to talk and to express your feelings and your emotions, because it's really important to address that part of it. You can't just have a patient come in and say, "Oh, you have a brain injury. We'll just follow up. There's not much else to do." You have to be able to take the time. So as the healthcare providers, you really need to make sure that you take the time and let the patients ask the questions. I always tell my patients there is no stupid question, because if you don't know the answer to it, it's a fair question to ask, and I will help you find that answer. I might not know the answer, but I will help you find the answer. It often does require some mental health support to get through some of these. Because I don't have an answer of how quickly you're going to get better, that mental health support will help you figure out some coping mechanisms to work on this as we go through, so that we don't have all of those questions just kind of swirling around us and we don't ever come up to an answer of them. We have to be able to answer them at some point, but until that, you need to be able to cope with all of those questions and just put words to the questions, because sometimes people don't even know how to ask the questions. And then I do often recommend couples therapy as we go through this too, because the partner has questions, the family has questions, and it's very difficult to answer all of those things when the significant other is not coming to those appointments. So it's really important that you have that person, that support person, come to the appointments with you, ask those questions. And if they can't be there, you write them down and you take notes so that they get the answers. But it's really, really important to work on that relationship side of things, which is another R that we'll cover later in today's episode. And then my last key for this one is that you need to give yourself some grace. If you had a friend who had an injury, you would not be telling them, "Oh, just get over yourself already." You would give them time. You would let them ask questions of you. So if you are the injured person, you have all those questions, give yourself a little bit of grace, because you're not going to have all the answers right now. You have to I hate when people say this because I hate doing it myself, but trust the process. So there is a process involved in healing, and the answers will come in time, generally. Sometimes we don't get all the answers, but the answers generally come in time. So you do need to be your own friend. Don't be so hard on yourself if you're the injured person. Give yourself a little bit of grace to recover and identify what those questions are. The second and last cue, because it was just really hard to come up with some of these words, is quality of life. And on quality of life, this is, aside from those physical symptoms, this is probably the biggest one that people complain about when they are concerned about their recovery from a brain injury, is that quality of their life, because they are not what they used to be. They can't do the things that they used to do. And it's very frustrating and it's very angering and leads to a lot of grief. We talked about grief back in the G. There's a lot of things that we talked about already, but brain injury often happens when you are in the prime of your life. You might be the breadwinner of the family. You might be the head of the household. And now you can't be those things because you can't get back to work. You can't manage that household very well. And it is often the people that are very independent and they don't like relying on other people for anything. That's most of my patients. They are all very independent, or were very independent before their injuries, and they are not at that same level of independence because they need help. They need some guidance. They need some assistance getting through all of these things. And patients often report to me, and I felt it too, is that they were missing out on those family activities, their kids' activities, grandkids' activities, getting together with family, just for family dinners, family gatherings, family holidays, getting to go out and do the things that they enjoy in life, participating in their hobbies, because they can't do those things because of their brain injury and the symptoms that they're experiencing. And those changes in that quality of life lead to a lot of mental health symptoms that people experience. Stress, depression, suicidal ideation, divorce, and those relationship issues. All of those things make it harder to recover from the brain injury as well. So if you have higher levels of stress, it makes your symptoms worse. It makes it slower to recover from that brain injury. If you go into a depressed state, maybe it might not be full-on depression, but you're in a depressed state because of the experiences that you're having, because you can't get back to work, because you can't do the things that you used to do, that also slows down your healing. There's so much research to identify that. And that's why we talk about mood. We talk about, can I help you with that? And sometimes people do need medications to get them through. It's a bridge. I just talked with this about a patient last week. It's a bridge. It doesn't have to be something that you are on forever now, but 3 to 6 months. It's a bridge to get you through this tough time, help you learn those coping techniques, the coping mechanisms that will get you through the rest of the time. because sometimes we have to learn to compensate and we don't get back to what we were 100% before. And we have to learn to be okay with that. But until that point, sometimes therapy and or medications can be helpful to get us through that. And the other part about that is that those really high functioning individuals, before they have their brain injury, once they have that brain injury and they go for neuropsychological testing, they do any of the evaluations, cognitive evaluations with OT, with speech therapy, and we're doing these assessments, they score within quote unquote normal for their average or for their age range. So then they're considered normal when that's not normal for that individual. And I don't say this to try to sound uppity or on my high horse or anything, but I was one of those really high functioning people. And when I did my neuropsychological test, I was really grateful. I was very grateful that my neuropsychologist took that into account, looked at my level of education, my level of experience working in healthcare. And with me being on the lower end of the normal ranges for many of those cognitive functions, she identified that that probably was not my baseline given my level of functioning prior to the injury. And that's what I wish more neuropsychologists could do, because I'm starting to see articles that are questioning in this now. And what are we telling patients when we tell them that they're normal for their age range when that might not have been their baseline? I kind of wish we could get neuropsychological baselines on everybody so that we knew where their cognitive functioning was before they have a brain injury, but we never know when that's going to happen. That's a lot of testing. We're short on neuropsychologists anyway, so it'd be really tough to get that baseline on everybody, but it would be nice to have that so we could quantify the loss of the function, that executive functioning, the things that make us able to control our lives, make us able to make decisions and do the things that we need to do for work, organize things, control things in our environment, control our schedules, make our schedules, try to follow those schedules. Because once you have that executive functioning that's not working, you can't even make the schedule to follow it, much less be able to follow it. So there's so many levels in there. And that quality of life is something that's significantly affected. There is one quality of life tool that I found recently that I'm starting to try in my clinic to see what kind of results I'm going to get on it. And we can monitor over time and see how they're doing. My ideal is that I'll test it kind of at the beginning and the end of patients' time over time to see how they're recovering, what their quality of life looks like as they recover. QOLIBRI, Colibri, I think is what I'm calling it right now. I don't know if that's how they're pronouncing it, but that's the assessment for the traumatic brain injury specific quality of life assessment. That's the only one that I've found that is like it is, looking at specific to brain injury. So it's been tested in several different countries, trying to see how accurate it is for brain injured individuals. And it has shown accuracy so far. So kind of excited to see what it shows in my patients as well. Moving on to the letter R's, because that's going to be the bigger part of this conversation. The first R letter is rehab. We've talked about OT, we've talked about PT. Speech is coming up in the next set of letters in the letter S. But rehab has many phases. It starts in the inpatient setting for someone that has a brain injury and they're hospitalized. So once they're in the hospital, they often get assessed by OT-PT, potentially speech, but mostly it's OT-PT at that point. Occupational therapy, physical therapy. And in that acute phase, they're very important on trying to get patients ready for discharge from the hospital. How independent are they? Do they have any difficulties? Do they need therapy after they discharge from the hospital? So that acute phase is very important. For people that experience a severe injury, they've got bleeding into their brain, skull fractures, oftentimes a lot of orthopedic fractures because of the nature of their injury as well. They might either require an acute rehab stay or a long-term acute rehab stay, which again can happen in a variety of settings. Sometimes it's actually in a rehab facility. Sometimes it's in a long-term care facility, but in a different wing of that long-term care facility. Both of those require that the patient stays admitted to that area 24/7. So they don't get to leave. They don't get to go home and come back for therapies. They stay in there just like as if they were in a hospitalization stay. And then following discharge from either the acute rehab or that long-term acute rehab center, they might go to a skilled nursing facility, which again can be in a long-term care facility. But oftentimes, again, sometimes they have a separate wing for that and they're more focused on that rehab setting of things. Sometimes you're intermingled within the regular nursing home residents. So it's kind of a variety depending on where you are and what kind of facilities you have in your area. But those would be for the individuals who aren't ready to go back home, but they don't have the needs. They're not seeing the significant acute gains that would keep them either in that acute rehab stay or that long-term acute rehab stay. Long-term acute rehab is usually if they have like a tracheostomy, a tube feeding, things like that, and then they potentially would go to that skilled nursing facility, as I mentioned. And then if they get discharged home at any point of that, whether it was immediately after the emergency room visit or after any of these phases of care, then we need to look at whether or not we need rehab in that outpatient setting where they live at home, but they either have therapies come to their home or they go to the therapy locations. So in either one of those, that's also an option for speech PTOT to do those assessments and work on those therapies. And as I mentioned, we've already talked about the PTOT. We're going to talk about the speech later on. I will admit that as a healthcare provider, I never used to be a really good patient. We always kind of have this joke that providers make the worst patients because we kind of think we don't need it, or we know the things already, so we don't do them. And prior to my brain injury, if I had a fracture or an injury or something and needed physical therapy, I will admit this now, I didn't always do my exercises. I didn't always go to my therapy appointments. I usually finished them early, and I wouldn't finish out the entirety of the sessions that were scheduled because I didn't feel like I needed it. And I really did a lot of exercise and rehab on my own, and I always recovered just fine. When it came to my brain injury, however, I really, really wanted to get back to being my normal self, and I was like the best patient possible. I did all of my therapies. I went to all of my appointments. Unless I was really sick, then I stayed home. But I did all my things because I really wanted my brain back, and that was really, really important to me. So I used to kind of take for granted that I would just bounce back. But when I had my own brain injury, I did not just bounce back. So I did all the therapy. And after having just recently had my rotator cuff repaired and doing all of the physical therapy for that, physical therapist last week told me that she could tell when I had been doing all of my exercises because it shows in range of motion and movement. So if you're doing all the exercises, you're going to see the rewards of it. Does that mean that you're never going to hit a plateau? No. Plateaus happen, and sometimes we change things up and we change different therapies. We change to a different therapist. But the more you do those exercises, the more you do the things that therapy wants you to do, the better you'll be. It can be difficult when somebody has memory issues after a brain injury because they might not remember to do other therapies. That's when I'm talking with my patients about setting alarms on your phone, putting it on a calendar as if you were going to work. Do your exercises just like as if you were going to work. So you put that on your calendar, you block it off, and you do that. You set yourself an alarm on your phone or whatever to make sure that you get those things done because it's really, really so important. And the other kind of caveat with that I give is that make sure you're finding somebody that has experience working with brain injured patients. Depending on where you go for that therapy, sometimes it might be a TBI facility, a TBI focused facility. It might not be, but make sure that you're working with a therapist who has experience. They have knowledge about the things related to TBI because there are going to be some differences with it, and they might be able to give you some tips and tricks that are specific to TBI recovery. Shifting gears, the next R word is relationships. And again, we've talked about relationships a bit over the ABCs and different topics. And in other episodes on this show, I've had my husband on here to talk about our experiences with relationship. And it's probably time I bring him back for another update because it's been a while. We're almost at that 3-year mark. Probably a good time to do a little check-in, see how we're doing. But I've had many patients, unfortunately, share with me that they are considering divorce or that their partner is considering divorce because of the changes in their relationships that happened following their brain injury. We have personality changes. We have likes, dislikes changes. We have shorter fuses after brain injury, and that can really lead to a lot of difficulties in that marriage. And as I counseled a patient and her husband several weeks ago, if you go into a brain injury and your relationship was already rocky, it's just going to be that much more rocky. If you go into a brain injury with a really strong relationship, chances are that really strong relationship will continue. But whatever you have going into it, it tends to be magnified. in the process. So if you had any struggles beforehand, that's just going to be even more fuel to the fire after that brain injury. And so when we're looking at those relationship issues, sometimes the partner can't see the struggles that the individual with the brain injury is experiencing. They don't see it. They don't understand. They don't understand why you're not getting better. They don't understand what's going on. And again, the injured individual has a shorter fuse. So when that lack of understanding is happening, they're not quite as understanding of it either. And that lack of understanding leads to distance in the relationship, leads to breakdown of the relationship. But when we talk about relationships, it's not just that romantic partner that's affected. It can be friendships. It can be other members of your family, your children, your parents. When we have changes that include sound sensitivity, overstimulation, changes in language abilities, those individuals might tend to be less likely to get together with friends or family of any kind. And that can cause some distance. It can cause some friction between those relationships, regardless of what those relationships are. And it can lead to some animosity and some distance. So sometimes people find that they lose friendships. They lose some of those relationships after their brain injury. And oftentimes people will use the term, you really find out who your people are after a brain injury. And it is true, because sometimes those relationships don't last, whether it's a friendship or a romantic partnership. They might not last, but you might find something better. I have some friends that I wasn't as close with before my injury, and now we're much closer because we have things that we can talk about, and we can help each other because we've both had brain injuries. And I have other friendships which aren't as strong anymore, because there is a lot of difference between us after my brain injury than before. So that is something to consider. It's not always a bad thing, but it can feel really bad in the moment, because it can feel like rejection, and it can feel like things are not where they're supposed to be until you kind of settle out and find out where you land on that. We might not feel like we have much in common with those around us anymore, with our friends, with our family. And friends and family, regardless of how loving they are, still don't always understand the frustrations, the struggles, and that difficulty tolerating overstimulating environments can lead to a lot of frustrations on both parts. And how do we manage all of this? So how do we get through all of these struggles? Individual therapy, family therapy, very, very helpful finding out ways to cope and ways to reconnect with others. There are several organizations that offer retreats for couples or families after brain injury, and some of them are free of charge. We've had Love Your Brain on the show many, many episodes ago now. A year ago, I got introduced to the organization Love Your Brain. They have a lot of really good programming upcoming. I am working on scheduling with the founder of Hope Survives, which is another organization that offers a lot of support for families, for couples, for those relationships. And those are also free of charge. So some really great programming offered by some really great organizations. And then all of the different support groups and everything that are out there across the country, also really, really good. And then your rehab professionals, again, PTOT speech, they can give you some coping skills as well. So they can work with you on any of those things. And usually they welcome having a partner come to an appointment as well, so that they can go through some of those things with your partner. So offering those assistance there. OT can also help kind of manage some of the tasks around the house, which can kind of diffuse some of the frustrations with partners. And there's not a magic button. There's not a magic pill. There is no one significant medication that can treat all of the symptoms of concussion to make you better. It's something that takes time. It takes some skills. It takes some coping. It takes some changes, getting used to those changes. And yeah, there's just a lot going into those relationships. If you have more questions, you can go back to any of the other episodes where we talked about relationships as well. The next R I want to talk about is reasoning. Reasoning with somebody who has had a brain injury. I liken it to reasoning with my child who has autism. So there are many, many ways that I can relate with my child now, because there are times that I feel very much like the struggles that I have seen with him over his lifetime. That neurodiversity is real with the brain injured population. And if you are new to this population, you might not have noticed it before. But if you had any kind of neurodivergence before your brain injury, it's probably heightened now. So individuals that have had a brain injury can have problems with problem solving, with planning, with decision making, with understanding consequences. So if you get in an argument, they might not understand the consequences of that argument. You can't exactly reason with them. It was very difficult for my family to reason with me when I was at the end of my rope and I'd hit my wall and I could no longer function for the day, essentially. My fuse was short and I was upset with everybody. And then I'd have to go back and apologize to the rest of my family. But at the moment, you could not reason with me because I couldn't rationalize what was happening. I couldn't understand what was happening because my brain was overly sensitized to things. I couldn't tolerate those things. So mental processes can be much slower. Abstract concepts can be difficult to understand. All of those lead to reduced flexibility in thinking and that reduced ability to reason during arguments. So when you pair that reasoning difficulty with other relationship difficulties that we just talked about, we can see even more problems when a couple or partnership or friendship or family membership, any of those ships get into arguments because you can't reason through it with somebody that's had a brain injury very well. And it makes it really difficult to understand that other person's point of view on both sides of it, honestly. Thinking with after a brain injury tends to be more concrete. It's definitely more black and white. There's not a lot of gray area, even though I kind of joke that everything is gray matter in the brain. But in this case, it's very black and white. And those abstract concepts are very difficult to grasp when you see things black and white. And again, I can speak from experience on this one, and it can be problematic regardless of the relationship. So how do we manage reasoning difficulties? Again, here comes the rehab professionals, the OT, PT, speech. OT and speech especially, they deal with a lot of the cognitive things, the processing, the coping mechanisms, dealing with all of these functional skills that help us on a day-to-day basis so that we can try to understand people a little bit better. Again, mental health therapy, very, very important to identify those coping mechanisms and ways to work around all of these frustrations. So I think you're kind of getting, hopefully, the idea that rehab, very, very important. Mental health, also mental health, very, very, very important. All of these things are so important for brain injury recovery. And I really hope that we can get rid of the stigma for mental health because it happens to everyone that has a brain injury. Everyone has issues with mental health at some point. Okay, I take that back. If somebody's had a mild concussion, like truly a mild concussion, and their symptoms last minutes or hours, maybe up to that day, and they don't have anything beyond that, they might get away with not having any mental health issues. But anybody else, they can have mental health issues just because of the structural changes in the brain, the hormonal changes in the brain. And now we add all of these frustrations with relationships and reasoning and all of these other things. Mental health is so important, and it needs to be just a routine part of recovery from a brain injury. I'm going to say that for the folks in the back doing insurance decision making. Mental health is a mandatory part of recovery for brain injury. I think I had talked about that back in M for mental health. Lots of different times we've talked about it, but very, very, very important. On to the next R letter. The next R letter is rest. And this one is a word that I have never been good at, even before my brain injury. I was never good at this resting word. So rest is a very difficult concept for individuals who have always been very independent. And then those who've had a brain injury can feel like they need to be constantly moving and doing things so that they can add value to their families because they're not working, they're not doing their normal household activities. So many times they feel like a burden on their families and they try to do as much as they can and they push past their limit. They push past that wall and then they forget to rest until they absolutely have to. And sometimes I've talked to people and I think sometimes brain injuries happen because we're being forced to rest because we've been pushing ourselves for so long that somebody had to force us to rest. Not that it's ever a good thing that you have a brain injury, but it's forcing you to rest because you've pushed yourself so hard for so long. And as I was working with my own PT, OT, and speech, literally all three of them would tell me at any given time that I needed to take breaks before I needed them, meaning I needed to take breaks to prevent needing the bigger breaks. And I struggled for a long time to understand what that meant. I did not know how to take a break before I needed to take a break. But you have to schedule them. When you wait to take a break until you absolutely need it, it's often too late and it takes you much longer to recover from that activity. If you schedule breaks, you take them before you need them, it's easier to recover and easier to get back into that activity that you were doing. If you are working, for example, take breaks every couple of hours, it's going to be easier to get back into that work. If you push, and now you've now gone to 4 or 5 hours, you might have to leave and go home for the day because that's it. That's all you can handle. Whereas if you were taking those breaks every 2 hours, you might make it through that 8-hour day. I wouldn't recommend much more than that at this point if you're suffering a brain injury and trying to recover. But I think you kind of understand what I'm saying with that one. If not, let me know. What does rest look like? This is a difficult one for people too, because for me, I didn't know what rest looked like. There was a long time that I did not rest because I didn't know what it looked like. I used to do health coaching, all the online beach body workouts, all of those things. I was very intense with my workouts, and you worked out 5-6 days a week, and then that seventh day or sometimes the sixth and seventh day, you're supposed to take a break and rest. And I didn't know what that meant because I felt like I need to be constantly moving. So sometimes I would take what I would call an active rest break and rest day, and I would still go for a walk or something because I still needed to do something. And that might be okay if that's your kind of person. But after a brain injury, you do need to rest. So what does that look like? It might involve taking a nap. It might not need to be a nap. It could just be sitting and focusing on your breathing for a little bit. It might be getting out into nature, sitting on a park bench or walking through a park, taking a stroll. It's not something that's any heavy, strenuous walk. Sometimes walking can be rest because you're getting outside, you're getting that sunshine, but you do have to be cautious not to overdo it, even on those rest days. So maybe go for just a shorter walk, just a really brief one, especially in those early phases of recovery. I don't recommend using rest time to be on electronics because electronics are still stimulating your brain. Sometimes people get really bored and they feel like they need to do something. There are a lot of apps on the phone that can be kind of like therapy now too. They're educational. They can work on vision. They can work on memory types of things. So you can use that to a certain extent, but I don't want you using electronics regularly to rest because you need to rest your brain. You need to rest your eyes. You need to cognitively rest, especially early on in that recovery, those first few days while your brain needs to reset. And then other times you need to take a break. You still need to get off the electronics because especially if you're constantly on a computer for work and you need to take a break, that break absolutely has to be off electronics. Otherwise, you're not giving your brain a break from that. So in general, rest can be physical rest. It can be cognitive rest. It can be sensory rest. So lots of different things that can look like. Physical rest can involve avoiding sports, avoiding lifting, weightlifting, intense physical exertion. Cognitive rest can be limiting those activities that require high concentration, such as video games, texting, reading. All of those things take high concentration. And sometimes people will tell me, well, I do that to relax. You're still concentrating. You're still using your brain. So it's not truly cognitive rest when you're doing that. Sensory rest is when you get away from bright lights, loud noises, crowded environments, taking a break from those kind of things because you need to give your sensory system a break as well. All of those count as rest. Any combination thereof of all of those things. But regardless, you need to rest. You need to take the rest. You need to schedule the rest breaks so that you don't hit that wall and then you can't recover for longer periods of time. Next R word is reaction times. And reaction times are often affected after a brain injury, possibly due to damaged neural connectivity, that connection in the brain between the brain cells. And it's often related with slower processing times. So sometimes it takes extra time to process what you're seeing so that you can react to it, you can respond. So that ability to react, especially in times of potential safety hazards, can be affected because of that slower processing time, that slower reaction time. We see this most often when people try to get back to driving, when they want to work around heavy equipment. I've had some patients that want to get back to their chainsaws because they have to cut wood in the winter. You got to be cautious about those equipment because you might not be able to respond as quickly if you drop it, if you trip, if you do something else. Working on ladders, again, that's a safety thing, or any other number of activities where you need to potentially respond quickly. If your reaction times are diminished, that might mean that you can't get back to those activities, and sometimes that's work. So sometimes that's work, sometimes that's your leisure activities. Either one, we have to take some breaks when we are doing those activities because we don't want you to get injured. We don't want more injuries on this. And there are many factors that can influence that recovery of those reaction times, including age, overall health, repeated injuries. There are gender differences with how our brains work at baseline, even without a brain injury. So, males and females experience different types of cognitive changes at following a brain injury. I did an episode on this quite some time ago as well. Level of fatigue. Reaction times tend to be slower when you're fatigued, when you're tired. So, being cautious when you're tired and fatigued, especially in those safety type of situations, is going to be really important as well. Again, how do we manage these things? Working with PT and OT. Again, our rehab therapists really are important here. And this is one thing that electronics can be helpful for. So if we're talking about not necessarily taking that cognitive rest, but doing some activities purposely on electronics to reteach us some of those reaction times, there are a multitude of games available on your phones now, on those apps that can actually work on response times, processing information. So those can be very helpful for trying to kind of rehab that reaction time part. Kind of related, the next R is return to play and return to work. So when we look at these, the CDC Heads Up Concussion Program has outlined a really, really good evidence-based strategy for returning to sports. That return is really well laid out. There are several steps to returning to activities, 6 steps to be exact. Step 1 is getting back to those regular activities such as school. So the cognitive things coming first. Step 2, introducing some light aerobic activity such as 5 to 10 minutes on an exercise bike, walking, light jogging, no weightlifting quite yet. Step 3, introducing moderate activity to increase the heart rate. That could include moderate jogging, brief running, moderate intensity stationary bike, moderate intensity weightlifting, which is less time and less weights than your typical routine. Step 4 is introducing heavy, non-contact activities such as sprinting or running, high-intensity stationary bike, regular weightlifting routine, and non-contact sport-specific drills. Step 5 is reintroducing practices and full contact, if it's a contact sport, in a controlled practice space. Final step, step 6, is returning to competition. If at any point in their patients have redevelopment of their symptoms, they usually have to take it down a step and kind of back off on it a little bit. So we have this stepwise fashion that's really well laid out. It's taught to coaches, to school administration. It's taught in all of these different places where we look at reintroducing somebody to a competitive sport. We're not really good about using that for people who aren't in competitive sports, people who use sports as a hobby. So I think we need to get a little bit better at that for reintroducing people to their sports as hobbies. Reintroducing to work and school is less laid out than that return to play. There's not a structure. There's not a stepwise fashion for doing it. We have to do this on a case-by-case basis. And returning to work or school often requires accommodations based on the patient's symptoms to make sure that they can successfully reintegrate into school or work. Again, we need to do some kind of stepwise approach. There are not 6 beautiful steps to look at to see if we're doing well. We have to do that one-on-one with each patient, finding that stepwise approach. But it usually requires some combination of either doing shorter days at work initially or less days in a week or both. And then again, limiting activities that we're allowing activities outside of the work time. So if you're doing 4 hours of work, you can't really do much the rest of the day, or we're limiting the activities that they're doing while they're at work to limit the number of activities that they have to do, limit the extent, the difficulty of the level of work that they're doing initially, or allowing extra time to complete their work. Those cognitive symptoms tend to be some of the hardest to overcome after a brain injury. Headaches, I think headaches and cognitive are probably the 2 that are very elusive to therapies. So we work on those for a really long time, and those tend to be the 2 biggest things that people complain about is their cognition and their headaches. So again, as I mentioned, the return to work, return to school really needs to be individualized because every person is going to have different needs. Somewhere along the line, I heard the term, if you've seen one concussion, you've seen one concussion. And I kind of agree, kind of don't agree, because yes, everybody has a different recovery time. I can't see 8 patients in a clinic day and have them all be following the same pattern. They don't all have the same symptoms. They don't all have the same responses. They don't all have the same recovery timeline. They have similarities. There are definitely similarities along all of the people that have brain injury. And there is a wide variety of symptoms that can happen. Not every person will experience all of those symptoms, but there are definitely similarities. But that does not mean that you can take one care plan and cut and paste and put it in the other person, because everybody responds differently. Everybody needs different advice, but the same, if that makes sense. So there are things that I will talk about over and over and over again. And I've created some handouts on the things that I talk about over and over and over again. But again, not everybody has the same level of those symptoms. So everybody's going to be a little bit different. Some people need extra time to do projects at work. Some people need dim lighting. Some people need screen overlays on their computer. Some people need the extra breaks. They need the shorter days. They need a really, really gradual introduction to work. Some people need a week or two, and then they can go back to their regular things. And I'm a little bit jealous of those people, but some people get to do that really well. So everybody has a different recovery path. And there is one benefit I see in all of this to being in a digital world. Some may argue that there's way more benefits than that, but one benefit to being in a digital world is that ability to potentially do work or school from home, because everything is online now. So many of the jobs that people do, not all, but many of them can be done online from a computer at home. Sometimes people get oversensitive to light, sound, smells, and going into an office, they will get a headache getting on the elevator and getting into the office. So unless they have an office that they can take a back hallway in and they don't have to talk to anybody on the way to get there, they're probably going to come into some kind of contact with things that can overstimulate their system before they even start their workday. If that's the case, working from home for a little bit, just testing out that cognitive ability, getting them used to doing longer periods of time on the computer, doing their work at home in a controlled setting where they can manage the sounds, the smells, the lights. They can close the curtains, they can dim the lights. They can do things on their time. They can take breaks. Sometimes that's better for people. Even going back to school, doing your assignments online, watching a video online at home rather than sitting in a classroom with 30 other people if you're in a high school or grade school class, or 100 other people if you're in a college classroom. It might be easier to do that online watching a video than it is to be sitting in that classroom with all of the noises of everybody scratching them, taking their notes, chewing their gum, drinking their water, kicking their feet around. There are so many sounds and smells, and if you've not paid attention to those sounds and smells before and you have a brain injury, you're going to pay attention to them now because they're all going to be really, really loud. But sometimes it is really good to start at that home setting where they can control the environment and then gradually, little by little, get them back into the office. The very hard truth about returning to work is that some people don't get to return to their previous jobs. I didn't write the numbers down, but I talked about this back in, I think, letter J with jobs or returning jobs or something. I know I talked about this before and shared statistics on it, but there's a hard truth that many people will not be able to return to their jobs as they did previously. It might be too physically overstimulating. It might be a physical job, and now they need something that is not physical because their neck can't tolerate it. Their dizziness, their balance can't tolerate that physical job anymore. Or they have cognitive things that are keeping them from getting back to work. They might be able to do some kind of work, but it's not going to be the work that they did before. And the frustrating part of this is trying to get them through the disability process, because they need that disability in order to help them get through the financial times that they're having right now. Does that mean that they will never get back to any kind of job? Not necessarily. But the difficult part with that too is that if you're going to go back to a different kind of job, you have to learn something new. And when you've had a brain injury that you can't remember things, you can't remember the things that you needed to do for your previous job, learning something new to do a different kind of job is still going to be difficult. And I think that's where a lot of our disability companies and the insurance companies, the work comp, all of those things struggle to see that, because you have to learn new things. And sometimes if you were out of your job for a long period of time and things have changed at work, you go back and you have to learn something there, that's still just as difficult. And we forget about that learning piece and how difficult that learning piece can be. So that's a hard truth, is that some people won't get back to work. not the job they had before. Some people don't get back to work at all because of that learning piece that they can't learn to do something new. And that's very frustrating. And that brings back that whole need for mental health services because we need to get through that. The very last R I have for you today is recovery. And as we've just talked about, recovery looks different for everybody. In previous years, research 20 years ago told us that most patients with a mild TBI, so a concussion, would get better. They'd get back to their normal selves within 3 to 4 weeks. Most people did that. So that's what we thought was going to be the case. And very few people outside of that would go on to have long-term symptoms. And even then, I don't know that providers always believed them, to be honest. I think we know now that that's not the case. Research from 2021 on has all identified that 30 to 50% of individuals continue to have symptoms well beyond a year. Some of them go on forever, but 30 to 50% well beyond a year still have symptoms. In previous years, we thought that recovery essentially ended somewhere between 6 and 12 months. So whatever you got back within that time frame, that's all you got back. I think we've identified now too that also is incorrect, because we know now that people can continue to get better beyond a year. I've seen patients who are decades past their injury, many, many years past their injury. And if they didn't do any kind of therapy previous, or maybe they did do some therapy and now they have a new injury, if they do new therapy, try new things, they will see improvement. I literally have taken care of patients that had injuries decades ago, still had symptoms. We treated in a new way, and their symptoms either went away or reduced significantly, and their quality of life was so much better. I had patients telling me that it's really weird now getting used to not having their headaches because they had them for so long. It's really weird to not have them now, or it's really weird to not have that constant buzzing sound in my head because we've now dealt with dizziness, balance things, and now the balance and dizziness is better. And it's really weird because that constant, like, weird sensation in their head is no longer there years after their injury. So if you gain nothing else from this talk today, please remember that there is no end to recovery. And this is something I tell patients all the time, that it's frustrating, but it's exciting all at the same time. There is no end to when you can recover. I'm almost 3 years out. I'm still seeing improvements on a regular basis. So even though people get delayed diagnosis, they get misdiagnosed with different things, if we identify it even later on, they're still going to see improvements after that. Are they going to be as dramatic and as quickly? Probably not. But we can still see improvements. And that's the thing that we need to really be aware of as healthcare providers, that we can still make a difference for our patients long, long after they've had their injury. So that is my ABCs of concussion for you for today. And I thank you guys so much. If you're still here at this end, thank you so much for listening to all of this. Again, if you have other topics, other letters, other things you'd like me to cover, please send me a message, send me a comment, share this show with somebody you think would benefit from it, because that helps my numbers grow. It helps other people get this information. At this point in time, I'm still not getting any financial kickbacks from this show. So share it wide and all the time, just because we want to share the information, not because I get any financial gain, just because I want everybody to get this information. So thank you so much for being here today. We will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it so that others can benefit. Please also consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee. The link is in the show notes. You can also go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to catch the latest info and get links on all of the social medias there. See you next time.